Okay, Thom.
All right. Well, happy Saturday, everybody. I am honored to be here to talk with all of you today about some best practices for Agile transformation. My name is Thom Shavor. I work for a company called Accenture as an Agile coach and a professional trainer. Additionally, I just started my own consulting firm where I'm going to be providing training and coaching services. So we're going to be talking about Agile transformation in a framework agnostic way, which just simply means that I'm not going to advocate any particular framework. What we're going to do is just talk about basic things that I've observed over my career and in my practice now that are important to have in order to implement Agile successfully. So everybody seems to have one of these flash slides nowadays. So let me just go ahead and throw a few things out here. So this is me. This is just a shot when I was in software development school. I took a headshot of this. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. This is probably the best view of the city. We're known for the home of country music and now for bachelorette parties where women come in droves and they ride around in little trolley cars and bicycles and get drunk and pass out on the streets. Many, many years ago, I was in the Army. I was a combat medic in the 80s and 1990s, served in a couple of combat zones, a couple of wars, and after that, I got out in 1993. Let's see. This is my wife and I in Germany. We went to Germany a few years ago. We love to travel when we can. This up here is a lathe. One of the things that you'll learn about me if you spend any time with me is I love to work with my hands. I've always enjoyed doing things. I do a lot of DIY, home improvements, and kind of that kind of stuff. I recently got into woodworking, and this is the first bowl that I turned on a lathe. Over here, you can see this red pin that I made recently. Oops, red pin that I made recently. We have a lot of cats. My wife and I have 3 cats, and we've adopted a couple of other ones. So they just sort of came in. I used to have dogs, but they've since passed away. I love to coach and teach, and this is one of my CSM classes that I recently taught, where I just did a little screenshot to kind of show people. I love to have people in small classes, 10 to 12. And then I went to Louisiana State University, so I wanted to celebrate the women's basketball championship this year. They kicked some serious butt and made it happen, and I'm really, really stoked about that. So go Tigers. All right, so this is what we're going to talk about today. So I mentioned that I like working with my hands. And one of the things that my wife and I really like to do is garden. And we're in the process of, the last couple of years since COVID, we've done some additions to the house. We've done some landscaping in the front yard and the side, and we're getting ready actually next month to build a koi pond, which is freaking crazy. But anyway, what I want to do is I want to kind of talk about general Agile transformation and gardening. And this came up because I'm working with a client right now who had, they're a manufacturing client, they're a steel company, and they had never, ever really attempted Agile. They're very waterfall, traditionally since the 1940s and 50s. This company's been around a long time. And they wanted to kind of dip their toe cautiously into the Agile pond. So I started doing some things with one team. We implemented Scrum. We started doing the retrospectives and all the different ceremonies and started doing some training and that sort of stuff. And then recently the client came to me and said, hey, how can we upscale this? How can we make this more applicable to a larger group of people within this company? And it made me start thinking that, before you even start thinking about frameworks like SAFe or LESS or anything else, Scrum and Scrum, you need to really think about the building blocks, like those critical things that have to be in place before you even try any type of transformation. So what I wanted to do is just sort of give you my spiel on what I feel are really critical things that are necessary for us to implement Agile in any organization. And for most of you on this call, this is probably not going to be rocket science. The model that I'm going to be talking about is from Dr. Mary Liggett, 1987. So I actually graduated high school in 1985. So this is pretty much as old as I am, right? But I think that the cool thing about this particular model is that it's maintained the test of time, and it's still valid today, right? The model is called the Managing Complex Change model, and there's 5 things that Dr. Liggett said you have to have, in order to have a successful chance at implementing anything, any kind of change, right? visions, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. Okay. If you have those 5 elements locked down, you've got the greatest chance of success. If any of these are missing, different things are going to happen. And that's what I want to kind of run with you today, is just sort of talk through each of these 5 briefly, talk about how I think you can solve these particular problems. And then at the end of the chat, at the end of the lecture, we can kind of talk a little bit about it and see your experiences. And are there some things that I may have missed? Everybody ready to get cracking? I hear somebody's ready, so let's get moving. All right. So using sort of the gardening analogy, let's talk about planting the seeds. And the first one we're going to talk about is vision, right? So what is vision? Okay. Got on the internet this morning and cracked out the definition for you in case you don't know what it means. Vision. Here it is. Okay. We're talking about planning the future, right? A future plan. Okay. If you don't have a viewpoint about where you're going, right? You know, if you're building a garden and you don't know what you're going to plant and how big the plants are going to be and how much soil and nutrients and all that jazz you need, you're going to have problems. Okay. In a company, a lack of vision generally leads to confusion. People don't know what to do if there's no vision. They don't know where the train's going, right? They have no idea. They're doing their jobs, but they don't know what's the purpose of all of this. What are we doing? Okay. So it's pretty important to have vision. A lot of the problems with vision are due to poor communication or synchronization of the people that need to be involved, okay? Meaning information isn't shared properly with everyone within the organization. Again, this is not rocket science, right? This is common sense, okay? To solve this problem, you've got to prepare, okay? It's as simple as that. Establish tangible goals, things that you can achieve, things that you can measure, right? Be realistic. The goals should be clear. Keep your mission in mind, focus on guiding and inspiring your workforce, and adapt when necessary. Again, not overly confusing here, but having a vision is probably one of the most critical things you need to have, okay? And in a lot of my consulting work, the organizations that I go to, they all want to implement Agile because they think that it's going to increase their throughput, like how many stories they're going to actually, they think their workers are going to suddenly increase 50% of the stories, that they're creating and getting through the cycle and speed up and everything's going to be wonderful. And it just ain't that way, right? For those of you who've done this work for a little while, Agile is not a magic bullet and it's not designed to be a magic bullet, right? It's a culture change. It's a way of living. And if you don't embrace it, then you're going to suffer all the problems that, will happen to you. So, I mean, having a vision is a big deal and it avoids a lot of confusion. So I'll pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions on vision? Again, this is a conversation and not necessarily a lecture. So I'm happy to talk and answer questions while we're going through this. If not, I'll move on. Okay. Let's talk about skills. All right. So the second thing that's important to have is skills. Okay. And you can see the definition that I put here, the ability to use one's knowledge effectively and readily in execution or performance. Okay. In a company, generally what you see and what I've seen is that if you have team members that don't have the right skills, it leads to anxiety and stress. Okay. How many of you work on teams now where you're trying to do a particular job and let's say it's like a .NET project and you don't have the right developers to actually produce the thing you're trying to produce, or your employees are too inexperienced or too new and they just don't have enough seasoning yet to be able to do what you want them to do. This is a really common thing in a lot of teams. Okay, today, with people jumping ship and moving around and all of the stress that's going on with the modern world since COVID, lots of team members are being brought on that don't necessarily have all the skills. And for the people on the team, this is really, really stressful. Okay. So the way around this is to empower, encourage, and persuade employees to upskill. And this is something that I don't think a lot of companies do well. We try to hire people based on what their skill sets are, but we don't really think about upskilling. And in my opinion, that's probably more important. We need to work on soft skills. Okay, I see a lot of employees that are being hired by companies now can't write a proper email, can't talk to clients and negotiate. They don't know how to say no. They don't know how to deal with conflict resolution. They don't speak well. They don't know how to coach. Managers don't know how to coach. All of these types of soft skills are really, really, really critically important. So when you're hiring, not only should you hire people with the right skill sets, you should work to develop all of these other skill sets. Additionally, the hard skills like programming languages, agile frameworks, etc. If you're going to be bringing people in, you have to be prepared to provide continuing education. There has to be a way to teach the hard things. The Agile frameworks is pretty straightforward. I mean, that's usually the Scrum Master is going to provide those types of things, or the Agile coach. But a lot of companies don't necessarily have a formal practice of doing this. Scrum Master, as most of you know, if you're a Scrum Mastering is a full-time job, right? And when you're in the middle of trying to do all the things, it's really hard to put some time aside and say, okay, I'm going to teach you about, let's say, the 3 pillars of Agile and go through that, right? And explain how Agile is important and that sort of thing. So you've got to be able to budget time for this. So I'll pause for a second. Anybody have any thoughts or anything on skills? And again, we're going to come back to this after, but I just want to pause and see if anybody has any thoughts. All right, hearing none, I'm going to move on.
Thom,
let's talk about.
Can I ask one?
Yes, of course. Let me go back. Yep.
When you say skills, right, are we talking about like from an agile transformation perspective? In general, like if you have an employee or person working, what kind of skills you need, in the context, can you share, like, how do you think about that?
I think about both. I think that, for agile transformations to be successful, like I talked about hard skills, there obviously needs to be some knowledge about agile frameworks, right? People need to understand what agile is and how it's appropriate. But at the same time, right, being agile is about working in a team. And if you don't have those necessary soft skills, for example, openness to feedback, if you're not open to feedback on an agile team, you're going to die, okay? Because we're supposed to be transparent. We're supposed to encourage that level of discussion, particularly in our scrums and retrospectives. Goodness, if people would lose their minds if you can't be transparent in a retrospective, or it just won't be effective, right? So, when I'm speaking about agile transformation, I'm talking about planting the seeds for everything. Does that make sense? Yeah, you're on mute, by the way. So yeah.
Yes, sorry.
I mean, for a lot of these types of, particularly the soft skills, a lot of them link into Agile specifically, right? Like coaching, like public speaking. Did that answer your question, Bibu? Yep.
It did. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. All right. So the next thing, okay, incentives. This is a hot topic. I want to talk about it for a minute. So incentives are things that incite or have the tendency to incite determination or action, right? They make us want to do things, right? We are not working purely for the goodness out of our hearts, at jobs. Generally, we're working to get paid. We're working to have a certain type of lifestyle, certain type of security, right? So I've got anybody know this reference from this movie, Show Me the Money? What we got, Mark? What is it?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. That's the movie.
Show me the money.
Right?
Jerry Maguire.
Yeah, Jerry Maguire, right? Show me the money. And this was like one of my favorite scenes in the movie where he just lost his mind, and he was not a great employee, but he was trying to like, hey, show me the money. You sit me. You want me to keep you as a manager? Show me the money, right? A lot of times we don't have the option to do that in our jobs, right? We don't have the ability to say, hey, I'm going to pay you a lot more. But, we have to be careful about our employees because, we all have to be incentivized in some way to do what we do. There's got to be something. You're not doing it for free. You're not doing it for nothing. There's a reason you're doing it. So the effort, really it comes down to me, it's by treating your people well, paying attention and listening and watching and observing, right? Pay equity, market competitive salaries. These are big things that are coming up now where people are jumping ship. I've had several people on teams I've worked for jump ship literally for, they were able to get 20% more to another job and boom, they were gone. And no notice, just boom, gone. You got to be careful with this kind of stuff. Make sure that you're evaluating your employees. Schedule flexibility, home flexibility, working from home flexibility. Work culture is a big deal. having a great place to work, happy people, not mean bosses. And then there's some other creative motivators, that anything that you can do. And this is something that I came up with on my current team. So I made a joke once in a sprint demo about what I did is I described the sprint demo as it's a chance for you to sort of the demo the work that you've done and to be a peacock. And I kind of did this whole thing because developers never get the credit that they're due, right? I mean, the developers are always the ones doing the work, but they never get to shine. So I was trying to explain to these people, like, look, guys and gals, this is your time to be the peacock, to throw the big colorful feathers and shine and say, look at me, look at the freaking awesome work I did. And they loved it. This team ate this up. Now, I'm not able to give them anything else. I sure as heck can't give them pay equity or market. I mean, I'm a consultant. I don't have the ability to do any of this stuff, but I can make it fun, right? So what I did was I came up with the Peacock Award. And what I do is I give this out. This is a certificate. And if anybody wants it, let me know. It's a Word document. And you basically just type in the name and the date of the person and the date that they get the award. And you can change this kind of stuff. But anyway, it's an award you give out in every sprint demo. I let the team vote on who's going to get the award. So it sort of incentivizes them to prepare for the sprint demo, to have their ducks in a row. And they actually fight for this. They get crazy competitive about this piece of paper. It's amazing. A small thing, but it's an incentive. Okay. So do what you can in your position to try to incentivize people to do good things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Can anybody think of some other things that I may have missed that I should add to the list? I mean, a lot of these are very general and they're out of the scope of most of us. But you may, depending on your role in the company, you may have the ability to make some of these decisions and some of these changes. I think as Agilists, we can certainly work toward a harmonious work culture, right? We can stop problems, in the bud. If they're having, we can make sure that, Scrum meetings are lasting 15 minutes, that people are treating each other with respect, that people are heard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can anybody think of anything else that I may have left out? All right. Let's talk about resources, right? Another hot topic today, when people are leaving at a drop of a hat and moving on. A lot of the teams that I've worked with recently have been very short-staffed. And because of that, the workload gets dumped on everybody else, and it's a problem, right? People are frustrated. When you don't have enough people working on a team to do the job, then the expectation, of course, from management is you have to keep going, right, at your level of throughput. Depending on how you're measuring things, if you're doing velocity or whatever, management always likes to have those metrics either staying the same or going up, right? And the reality is, if you don't have enough resources to do the job, it's generally not going to happen. There's usually going to be some kind of a decrease here. So the key when you're looking at an Agile implementation is to plan for the long term. Now, this is not necessarily an Agile concept, but it's going to lead into the next thing I'm going to talk about, right? So when you're planning for the long term, and particularly if you're a project management type person, make sure you've got adequate staffing levels. Make sure that you've got the right people in the right job and that they're going to be available for as long as you need, if not a little longer, right? Have funding secured well in advance of the project start. Plan for dependencies. This is where the Agile thing comes in, right? Planning for dependencies. This is something we should do, right? You should know that any dependencies that we're working on and have backup plans when those blockers are going to happen, because they will, right? Things are going to happen. You may have to have, you may be trying to get something into production and there's another team that's got something that's blocking you and that person's on vacation. I mean, I've heard crazy stuff and I'm sure you have too. How do you get around that? How do you figure that kind of stuff out? Talk as a team, particularly like during the retros. This is a great time to talk about this kind of stuff. Retros is not, in my opinion, is not just necessarily doing the what went well, what didn't go well, how do we improve kind of thing. It's an open session, right? And I think we don't use the retro enough for the time that we have booked to really flesh some things out. I think this is a great thing to talk about in retrospectives. Take a pause for a second. Any questions or comments? Am I doing okay on time? Yep, about half an hour. Okay. All right, action plan. The fifth one is an action plan. Action plans are probably, from an Agilist perspective, Agile plans are generally done fairly well. Someone earlier talked about like specific tools. I'm assuming you meant software tools like Jira or Azure DevOps or whatever that we used to sort of keep track of things. I mean, in general, we do pretty good as Agilists and that sort of stuff. But if you don't have an action plan, that leads to a lot of false starts. And what I've seen on teams, what kind of things I've seen on teams is where you'll have not a really great plan. You're like, you know what you want to do, but you don't know how to execute it. Like you don't say step one, step two, step three. You have a bunch of different things and people will step up and naturally want to do things. So what you'll have is what we call false starts, where you start having like people doing something when they shouldn't have done it. It's out of sequence. And that makes things really, really complicated. So what you want to do is make sure that you define those objectives for your strategy, break things down to, to high-level tasks. Key is assigning people responsibility over tasks. This is something I see a lot actually on client sites when I'm working with clients. They'll have these really great action plans. So they'll have just, they'll know 100 different things they know what they have to do. But what doesn't happen is they don't assign anyone responsibility for completing or owning the task. That's key. Okay, we can't do that. And as Agilists, we do this in our daily Scrum, right? When we allow the developers to select which user stories they're gonna bring into the sprint, that's part of owning that particular story, right? That's a responsibility and an obligation. Make sure that people are owning the tasks, and make sure that you have deadlines and milestones. We do this really, really well in Agile, but for teams that are not used to doing Agile, they probably don't do this real well. Or let me even back up a little bit further. For teams, I've also seen a lot of teams that are practicing Agile poorly and don't do a great job at this. How many of you have been on teams where a sprint seems to go on forever? Like it never ends. It just keeps things keep getting pushed back further and further and further. Or a user story that's supposed to be finished in 2 weeks takes 6 because it wasn't broken down into enough smaller tasks. The user stories weren't, defined enough or refined enough. Oops. Anyway, now we're at the end of the line. These are the 5 things I wanted to talk to you about. Now it's just time to enjoy it, right? So got a pretty picture of a garden here. This is not my garden, by the way. It's just something I got off the internet. But after these 5 things that we just talked about are satisfied and met, now we can really have a good success, a chance of implementing Agile successfully. And here's where we get to really shine, right? Now that all those basic elements are built in, now we can do things like promote transparency, inspection, and adaptation, right? Monitor metrics and KPIs, which Vibhu, this was a tee up for you, that Vibhu is going to talk about in a few minutes. We're going to talk about metrics and KPIs and monitor those for signs of trouble, right? Know your team's KPIs and monitor them carefully. Review them. If you're a Scrum Master, review this with your team often. Have dashboards, have meetings where these things are clearly shown so that you can monitor these types of things. If you're coaching, make sure you're coaching a team for success, making sure that taking care of any problems. Know your team. If people are having individual personal problems or work problems, help to deal with those, nip those in the bud, do as much as you can to resolve those things and help people out, right? Another thing that I find really interesting is like, this is associated sort of with technical debt, removing blockers for the long term. And what I see is short-term thinking a lot on teams that are trying to become Agile, but they're not really thinking about it. Because what I see a ton of teams that are solving things really quickly for the short term, putting in really short-term fixes, but it's going to come back inevitably and bite them on the butt later. I see this a ton. I was on a call the other day with a developer and he was like, he had a suggestion for a problem. He's like, oh, I could just hard code this thing and that'll solve it. I'm like, well, what happens like 3 years from now when you're not here? And somebody else has got to go back and fix your spaghetti code or figure out what you did. So try to encourage, things to be solved long-term, because ultimately later on, that's going to save a lot of time. Iterate is necessary because we're Agilists, and of course, enjoy the ride. That's it. That is what I've got. And I think we've got a minty thing for later, which I'll share the screen for a second. I think that's it. Huh?